In this video, we will deal with four basic four-part chords: the major seventh, the major sixth, the minor seventh, and the dominant seventh. Three of these are diatonic four-part chords. Hence, they can be built from one or more scale degrees of the major and minor scales. As the name implies, four-part chords consist of four notes: a root, a third, a fifth, and a seventh. Sometimes there's a sixth instead of a seventh. Chords with a seventh interval above the root are called seventh chords, and chords with a sixth interval above the root are called sixth chords. The different sizes of these intervals will determine the type or quality of four-part chords. However, the fifth interval is a perfect fifth in all these particular types of four-part chords that we are studying. Therefore, the fifth interval isn't part of the four-part chord chart to the left. When dealing with four-part or larger chords, I like to measure the intervals up from the root. Let's build each type of chord, starting with the major seventh chord. During the creation of the chords, I will use each of the two interval measurement methods, which we learned in the video about intervals. This time, I will use the first interval measurement method of counting the half steps up from the bottom note. That is, up from the root note of the chord. Each type of four-part chord will be constructed from the note C. So let's measure the intervals up from the root note to create the C major seventh chord. We need a major third interval from the root up to the third. This equals 4 half steps. Next, we need a perfect fifth interval from the root op to the fifth of the chord. This equals 7 half steps, so we need 3 more half steps up from the previous major third interval. The last interval is a major seventh interval. This equals 11 half steps, so we need 4 more half steps up from the previous perfect fifth interval. The first interval we need to build the C major sixth chord is a major third interval from the root up to the third of the chord. Next, we need a perfect fifth interval from the root up to the fifth of the chord. This equals 7 half steps, so we need 3 more half steps up from the previous major third interval. The last interval is a major sixth interval. This equals 9 half steps, so we need 2 more half steps up from the previous perfect fifth interval. Let's construct the minor seventh chord using the second interval measurement method we learned in the video on intervals. In this method, we construct a major scale from the root note of the chord and adjust the third, fifth, and seventh degrees to fit the required intervals of the C minor seventh chord accordingly. We know that each scale degree is a diatonic interval above the tonic or first degree of the scale. To recap, a diatonic interval is either major or perfect. Using this method, I will write the chord on the staff. We need a minor third interval from the root up to the third of the chord. The third scale degree of the C major scale is a major third interval. From the chromatic interval rules, we know that lowering a major interval by a half step creates a minor interval. Therefore, we need to lower the note E a half step to E flat. We need a perfect fifth interval from the root up to the fifth of the chord. As the fifth scale degree of the major scale built from the bottom note is already a perfect fifth interval, we don't need to adjust the note G. We need a minor seventh interval from the root up to the seventh of the chord. In the C major scale, we see that the seventh scale degree is a major seventh interval up from the root note. As a major interval reduced by a half step becomes a minor interval, we will lower the note B a half step to B flat. Once again, we will use the second interval measurement method to construct the C dominant seventh chord. We need a major third interval from the root up to the third of the chord. As the third scale degree of the major scale built from the bottom note is already a major third interval, we don't need to adjust the note E. We need a perfect fifth interval from the root up to the fifth of the chord. As the fifth scale degree of the major scale built from the bottom note is already a perfect fifth interval, we don't need to adjust the note G. We need a minor seventh interval from the root up to the seventh of the chord. In the C major scale, we see that the 7th scale degree is a major 7th interval up from the root note, so we need to lower the note B a half step to B flat. Let's hear the studied 4-part chords. I will play each type of 4-part chord from the note C. In other words, I will use C as the root of each chord. Obviously, the characteristic sound of each 4-part chord applies for any root note. The major 7th chord sounds thoughtful or soft. The major 6th chord sounds gentle and warm. The minor 7th chord sounds moody or contemplative. The dominant 7th chord sounds strong and restless. This is the diatonic 4-part chords built from the C major scale. So 4 types of 4-part chords are naturally built within the C major scale restriction. Like it was the case for diatonic triads, it is important to realize that this applies to all major scales. A major 7th chord is always built from the 1st and 4th degree of any major scale. A minor 7th chord is always built from the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th degree of any major scale. And a dominant 7th chord is always built from the 5th degree of any major scale. Notice the diatonic chord on the 7th scale degree, which is a chord type that we haven't dealt with. This is a minor 7th with flatted 5th chord. Just like the diatonic triads, the different diatonic chord qualities are notated with Roman numerals under each 4-part chord. Uppercase Roman numerals signifies a major type chord, that is, chords with a major triad with an added 6th or 7th interval. Lowercase Roman numerals signifies a minor type chord, that is, chords with a minor triad with an added 6th or 7th interval. And lowercase Roman numerals with a small circle signifies a diminished type chord, that is, chords with a diminished triad with an added 6th or 7th interval. Obviously, minor scales have the same diatonic 4-part chords. However, the 4-part chords are displaced. Now, the major 7th chords are built from the 3rd and 6th scale degrees. The minor 7th chords are built from the 1st, 4th, and 5th scale degrees. The dominant 7th chord is built from the 7th scale degree. And the minor 7th with flatted 5th chord is built from the 2nd degree of the scale. Again, this applies to all minor scales. I hope you liked the video. The next video is about relative and parallel scales.